We're going to resume with part 2, go over a few other things with our JavaScript. So we've talked about triple equals and what that does. We've got the same kind of logical operators in JavaScript like in Java, not the and the or, so double ampersand for and, double pipe for or. Our if statements would be the same, so we obviously have, you'll notice syntax similar to Java or PHP, so conditions go in round brackets, commands have to go inside of curly braces. So we've got if else, we have else if, we also have the switch statement. We want to evaluate one variable for a whole range of possible values. Switch is probably more convenient than using if else. We can nest ifs inside of other conditions, exactly the same as what you've already done in Java. We have the same kind of loops as well. So we've got while loops, while a condition is true, or do something while a condition is true. And we also have for loops. So start a counter, go to a certain condition, and decide how we want to increment those loops. So there's nothing new here, just all of those same constructs you're already used to using in some of your other languages like Java or PHP. They're available to us in JavaScript. So although JavaScript is not fully object-oriented, it does support the use of objects. So we can create an object, we can define properties and methods for that. So, you know, we might have a customer object and define properties like customer name, email, password, and we can define methods in there, such as, you know, register, retrieve password, checkout, etc. So we've got the ability to define our own objects, create our own functions, and write our own events. So for example, we might create a date object, string object. So some of the methods would be the same, you know, so extracting a substring. The string would have a property like length. We might convert characters to all lowercase to all uppercase. Again, really we're just repeating functions that you're already familiar with from Java. So a few examples here of what we might do with some general date functions, string functions. So these would be built into the JavaScript language. So JavaScript obviously supports functions, but I don't know that you guys, have you worked at all with anonymous functions in Java or no? I'm not sure actually if Java supports anonymous functions. So function, you know, we're used to functions with parameters. What an anonymous function allows us to do is to assign the result to a variable. The reason this is called an anonymous function is you'll notice this function has no name, because all we want to do is run a function, take a parameter or perhaps a series of parameters, but we want to assign the value to a variable. So rather than our function having a name and then us declaring a variable separately and setting the variable equal to the return value of our function, we have the option to do it this way as an anonymous function. It saves us a bit of coding. In this case, if we use the anonymous function, we have to declare the function before you call it. You can't call the function on line 10 and then define the function, an anonymous function, on line 11. Line 10 will have to declare and define what that function is, and then you have to call it from a line later on. So you don't have to use this syntax, but you're going to see it a lot in Node.js applications. Okay. We also talked about asynchronous code and callbacks last week with Node. So this is typically how they work. So the anonymous functions allow our callback to happen. It allows this function to execute and our code to continue on and do other things. So our code is not blocking and waiting for perhaps a long-running function to finish before we can move on. Okay, so we will get into using that style of function. So a few examples here. So in this case, our function has no parameters. So we're setting that value equal to our show year variable equal to the result of our function. Or we could have one or multiple parameters. And you notice the anonymous functions, there's no names. They're just preceded with function and the parameters without a name. So I realize the syntax is a little bit new. It'll become familiar pretty quickly to you. Or we can do it the way you're used to in Java, where we actually give the function a name and then we invoke it with a call after. We also have to be aware of variable scope. So we have both local and global variables. Probably best practice to use local variables. So obviously a local variable is defined and used within a function only. If we declare a variable up at the top of a JavaScript file, that variable is going to be global and available for any functions inside. It's generally a good idea to try to use local variables where we can, and if we need to pass them from one function to another, we'll tend to pass those as parameters as opposed to using global variables. It's okay to use global variables, but generally it's harder to debug that way. If we're constantly changing the value of a variable rather than passing it as parameters, it can be harder to keep track of what's happening to that value. So we oftentimes want to use local if we can. And we've got the same kind of array constructs. So all the things you can do with an array in Java, you can do with an array in JavaScript. We can count how many elements. So we can initialize, let's say we don't know how many elements are going to go in an array. We're going to populate it from a loop or a database query. We can initialize it as an empty array, or if we know how many values we're going to have, we can hard code in that number. Arrays in JavaScript obviously are zero-based, just like they are in Java, right? That first element will be element 0. So we've got the length property, which will tell us. And we'll frequently want to use this if we want to use a for loop to iterate through an array, right? From 0 to the length -1. So a few simple examples here. You know, we can delete a particular value. We can check the length of an item. So this kind of syntax would populate an array in a loop from 1 to 10. And here we would iterate through to output the values. Nothing new here. I'm sure you all know how to do this in Java and C++, in C and PHP. So the same things apply in JavaScript, really. Okay. And we have methods like push, shift, join, toString, with some code examples here of how we might use those. Okay, we can remove items with pop or join values. One other function, we're going to use this one. I'm not sure that this function exists in Java. I have a feeling it doesn't. We've got set timeout and clear timeout. Anybody have an idea what those would do? How you might use them? Tyler? Okay. Well, yeah. Explain a bit more. You're right. How would or why would you use it? What would it do? Okay, we could possibly. So it's basically allowing us to do a timer event in milliseconds. Okay, so we want some process to run, but we want to, so it could be, for example, let's say we want to check for files. We want to check for a new file upload in a directory. We can use JavaScript, we can use set timeout to check, say, every 5,000 milliseconds, every 5 seconds. Is there something here? Is there something here? Or we want the user to do a long-running process. We want to show a message, like a wait message or a loading message, for 10 seconds that we know. So it allows us to either put in a delay or to run another function repeatedly on a timer. We want to keep doing something regularly. And then clear timeout will stop that timeout from running.
Is there something called set interval for that? Like doing things like every 5 seconds, and then I think set timeout is you run it one time. It's like using the event loop and then.
Yes, you know what? Thank you. You're right. I'm confusing the two. So set interval would be for doing it repeatedly. You're right. So something like a slideshow, right? We want to load a new image every 10 seconds. We would use set interval for that. Thank you. And set timeout would put in a delay. So we want to allow some time for something to run before something else happens. We can do it that way. So I want to give you a little bit of practice with some JavaScript. So in Blackboard, in the Lesson 2 folder, there's a link here. This is a little tutorial from Code Academy. There's some really good JavaScript lessons. In fact, if you look here, let's Code School. So here are all of their JavaScript lessons. They actually have roughly 10 hours worth of JavaScript. Some of these would be too basic. So this would be for someone who's never programmed before. It probably wouldn't be worth wasting your time with to get started. But they introduce functions in JavaScript, loops, objects. So all of our work in this course is going to be JavaScript, so it's good that you're familiar and you're comfortable with it. So what you may want to do, start doing between now and next week, is start going through some of those and working through some of those online. Okay? But the one we're going to do, we're going to jump into the fourth one. It's using JavaScript to build a simple rock, paper, scissors game. So if I just jump in here, just grab that link, I'll open it in Chrome. So they've given you instructions on the left. There's basically 9 steps to doing this, and you can use the online code editor, and all the instructions are here. So it just says for the first thing, all you have to do is click the Save and Submit button to get started. You don't have to add any code yet. Right? So after you add each piece of code, so you click this button, it says, okay, start my next one. So now here are some instructions. So the instructions will be on the left. So you can just code here, and when you're done each section, click Save and Submit Code. This isn't for marks, but I'd like you to see if you can get the rock, paper, scissors game up and running. So click that link on Blackboard, it'll take you here, and you can code in here. You can also try your code as you're working. You can also try it here if you like. So you can open up a tab to JSBin and turn on the JavaScript and the console tab. You can turn off the HTML and output tabs, which are on by default. You can also use this to help you as well. So when you have your rock, paper, scissors game running, let me know. I want to come and see it. And I'm happy to help if you get stuck, you have a question. So again, this isn't for marks, but this is sort of to get your feet wet with doing some JavaScript coding. Kenzie, question?
I already went through this, so it's already done.
Okay. So it asks us to create a variable called user choice, and we use the prompt function. So give the user a prompt with the question text they've asked, and store that value that we get back from the user in user choice. And that was step 1. Step 2 was to use a random function to get the computer choice, so it was going to be a number somewhere between 0 and 1. And we stored that value in our computer choice variable. And notice it's using camel case, and in order to get the editor to agree with you, you have to name everything exactly the way it asks you to do in the instructions. So then we're evaluating what's our value of computer choice. So if it's in the lower third, so 0.33 or lower, said to set computer choice to rock. If we were between 1/3 and 2/3, the choice should be paper. And if we were above 0.666, our choice should be scissors. So that's how we set out the two variables we're playing with. The next thing it asked us to do was log to the console the choice for the computer. Then what we did, I created an anonymous function. So I created a variable called compare. That's what the instruction said to do. I set it equal to a function. Notice my function has no name. The function is anonymous. It doesn't need a name because we're just going to store the result in our compare variable. So it said our function should have 2 parameters, the first one called choice1 and the second one called choice2. We're going to pass in those 2 values, and then we need to compare. So the first instruction we had to do was first check whether they were equal. So I used triple equals. We could use double, but triple is better because it's checking both the value and the data type. So if the user entered rock and the computer also chose rock based on that number, our function would return this message saying we've got a tie. So if we didn't have a tie, So if this condition isn't true, we have two different values, so now we need to figure out who wins. So what order we check in isn't really important. So I'm going to say if the user put in paper, well, if the computer picked scissors, our function returns that scissors is the winner. Otherwise, the computer must have picked rock, and paper beats the rock. So that's our first set of conditions if the user picked paper. We then needed to go through the same logic again. Well, what happens in this case if the user, we didn't have a tie, the user didn't pick paper, but this time the user entered scissors. What happens in this case? Well, what did the computer pick, rock or paper? So again, we have two possible winners. And then lastly, so we don't have a tie, the user didn't pick paper, the user didn't pick scissors. Obviously, in that last else scenario, the user had to have picked rock. That's the only other possibility. So then we're going to compare if the user picked rock, what did the computer pick? Scissors, which would mean rock wins. Otherwise, the last fallback condition is the users picked rock and the computers picked paper, so in that case, the paper wins. So to call this, so here's our anonymous function. How do we call it? We actually just log out our compare variable, and we pass in the user as choice 1 and the computer as choice 2. So the result of this, when I run it, so if I pick rock and the computer picks paper, the paper wins. If I run it again, I can try another result. This time the computer picked scissors, so now rock wins. If you try this on JSBin, JSBin doesn't support the calling of anonymous functions. The other thing is, notice I had to call my function after I declare it. If I move this above, I'm not sure it's going to work. I think it will not. Okay? So if I try to call my anonymous compare function before I define it, I'm not so sure this will work. Oh, we'll see. Oh, it still does work. Okay, good to know. So I can call my function. Oops, I guess that would go here. Put it in the wrong spot. So this time I pick paper. So I'm paper, computers rock. So I need to code all of the different combinations, all the rules. It's really nothing more than a series of if statements. So the only part really that should be new for you is this use of the anonymous function. I don't have to use an anonymous function. I could do it the traditional way. So if I wanted the traditional way, I would do it this way, function compare, and then I would call compare. Actually, just the way it's done here. So this is traditional syntax, what you would used to see in Java. This should execute the same way. It does. I kind of like the anonymous function because we're going to be seeing lots of it. This may seem clearer for you today, but we won't typically see this style of a function declaration in Node. We'll see the use of anonymous functions a lot. So I think I'm going to keep it that way. So I will put this up on Blackboard. Okay. So you can try to finish this if you didn't finish or you were quite far behind. If you found this challenging, well, this is a pretty good test of the kind of stuff you're going to do in this class. So if you really struggled with this, I strongly recommend you spend some time on Code School or Code Academy's JavaScript lessons and try to get more comfortable, because I don't want anybody to get too far behind once we move into Node. Okay, because JavaScript is just the basics. We're sort of assuming you can do JavaScript, so then we can program with Node. Okay, so I will put this up right now. Okay. Kyle, if you would mind putting the lights back up, please, that would be great. And okay, so your solution is here. You can download it, but please, if you're not finished the lesson, I suggest go home and try and do it again. Now that you've seen the solution, see how much you can recreate. And then you can look at my solution file as you need to. Does anybody have any questions about the code here? Okay. We do have a little bit of time. I do want to play around with JavaScript arrays just a little bit. So if you can go to JSBin, we can just play around online with it. So if you can go to jsbin.com, just make sure you've turned on the JavaScript in the console. And we'll do just a little bit with arrays, so we can play with them. So we'll create an array of foods. So I'll use the var. And I'll put in square brackets to indicate an array. And we'll put in a few initial values here. So if I take out my semicolon, the console will complain. As soon as I put it in, it goes away. If I run this code, I get no error, but I get no output. So how would we do this? We just want to display the first item in the array. So we'll use console.log, foods, square bracket, yep. Well, let's see. Right, we put in 1. Which item did we get? Yeah, we got the second item. So remember, just like in Java, our arrays are 0 based, right? So our first item is going to be position 0, so we can clear that, run it. Now we get the first item in the array. So what if we want to show how many items we've got in the array? Grant? We just do foods. Dot length. Right. So 3 items, but the items are 0, 1, and 2, or the index is 0, 1, and 2. How would we do this? We want to go through our array. We want to output every value, but we want each value on a new line. Kyle?
You want to console.log and then foods, square brackets 0. And then I can break. Is it break for design?
We looked at break. It was in the PowerPoint slide. Anybody know how to do it? Yep, so we concatenate on, you're right, Akil, we concatenate on /n. So we can run this. I'll just clear the console. that gives us the first one, but we want each item. Jake? Yeah, so let's do a for loop. So what would our for loop look like?
Is there for each?
Yeah, okay, so we can say x equals 0. We should prefix it with var, the var keyword. So what comes after the 0? Yep. So start at 0. So you need x's. What number should we stop at? 2 or 3? So, or we could just say, if we want to stop at 2, we'll go so long as we're less than 3, right? Because we want 0, 1, and 2. And how do we want to increment? Yep. So we'll just wrap that in a set of curly braces. Yep. Okay. So start at index 0, do index 0, index 1, index 2, and then we want to stop. There is no index 3. Right? There's 3 items, and let's log it out and see what happens. Okay. So now we get each item, and each one's on a new line. So that's what we want, right? And we have to go 1 less than the length because our length starts at 1, but our index starts at 0, right? If I do less than or equal to, what's going to happen if I run it this way? Yeah, we get undefined because it's looking for an index, an item, an index at position 3. It doesn't exist. So it doesn't actually give us an error, but we get an undefined. So we want that to be this way. D?
We can also do the for in, right? For can you var?
Yeah, let's try it. Okay.
Foods,
So try. Okay, so how do you want to do it? For each?
for each var,
Yep.
whatever name you want, food,
Okay.
in food,
Okay.
and bracket. No, it's actually yeah, it's yeah, the bracket, yeah.
Here?
And then console.log and bracket the foods and square bracket we say food. So that's the name that I named.
Okay.
Actually, what I did is for. It's not for each.
You did 4.
Yeah. I don't know why there isn't for each, but
Okay, well, let's
but
run.
if you do 4,
Yep, so it's still going to run that way as well. So we can use 4. So the for each, notice what happens with the color coding? Well, it's hard to see, I guess, on my screen. So it's black when I put in the for each. When I just do it as 4, the error goes away. So we don't have for each in JavaScript. Okay, we don't have that kind of typing for iterating through a collection in JavaScript. Something to keep in mind and be aware of.
Still kind of do it though.
We could,
Well, it's just
yeah, but we're using different syntax. One other thing to try. I'm going to change my array. I'm going to take that original array and copy it. But I'm going to add something here. I'm going to make this multi-dimensional. If I've got time. So what I'm going to do after sushi is I'm going to put in some ingredients. This way. So I'm going to make, in effect, a subarray that not only has a food, but also the ingredients in each food. So not only do I have a food, but then beside each food, I have a certain number of ingredients. And it may be different. So for tacos, I only put in 2 ingredients. For sushi and pizza, I put in 3 each. All right. All right, okay, so tacos will have cheese. We'll have lettuce. Okay. So we've got this kind of nested array. So here's what I want you to do, a little exercise for you to try for next week. We'll look at it at the beginning of class. What I want you to do is see if you can iterate in JavaScript through that array. Okay. And I've put this up on Blackboard, but here's what I want it to look like when you output it. Output the food, so the first item in each subarray, then put each ingredient on a new line, and notice there's a tab, so you can use /t to escape and put a tab in before the food name. So I want you to display that last array so that it looks like this. Okay, this is on Blackboard. It's not for marks, but just a little challenge for you to try at home. Okay, see if you can figure out how to create this output using JavaScript. So we'll start class next week. We'll kind of go over this little solution. Then we'll dive into Node, and you will have a lab doing some files in Node and posting them on Git next week. Okay, that's it for today. Have a great week. I will get the videos up on Blackboard.